The Atlantische Commissie organized a meeting with two NATO representatives. Marianne de Klaaslied from the Netherlands and Douglas Lute from the US discussed the subject about the NATO Summit 2014, what to expect in Wales.
We think in NATO that it will be more difficult to maintain this financial support for the Afghan national security forces, and that is an important reason for trying to continue to stay there and to set up this mission, which is supposed to last, say, 2 years, to help them fill certain gaps in their capabilities that they still need to work on. But it's clear that NATO will only stay there if we are welcome. Without an invitation, without a bilateral security agreement being signed, without a SOFA being signed, NATO is not able to stay in Afghanistan. And here we bump into a difficult relation with President Karzai, who so far has been hesitant to sign this bilateral security agreement, actually against the will of the Loya Jirga that he called for himself, the Loya Jirga, in the big tent event that took place last November. And that actually expressed itself in favor of this new mission to continue NATO presence after the 31st of December 2014. But we'll see. We have to cope with President Karzai. We have to see how things develop after the elections that will start in April, first round in April, hopefully pretty soon thereafter the second round. Now, what will be the second topic of this summit? And we have called this Future NATO. It's the heading of a variety of issues, but the main common thing is that it is looking ahead of where the alliance will go. And one of the main challenges will be to maintain the relationship with the partners that we have developed while being in Afghanistan. Well, just to remind you that in Afghanistan we have an alliance of almost 50 countries present, not just the 28 allies of NATO, but some 20 other countries that have joined NATO, some with fairly large contingents of troops, others with small contingents, but they stood shoulder to shoulder with us. They have had their casualties, and we think it is extremely important to try to maintain a close cooperation with them. Close cooperation in the sense of remaining, keeping the same level of interoperability, being able to work together, but also binding them to NATO politically.
What is your perspective as a young person on the future of NATO?
Well, as a student in political science with my main focus on international relations, I am personally very much interested in security issues and NATO, but I also see that a lot of students are not concerned with this topic, and I think that's a problem actually. I mean, we've seen in the polls that support for NATO is declining in the Netherlands, and I think that's something that we have to take very seriously. And, so I really think that the PR of NATO is a really important topic that might also be discussed during the summit in order to get more support, especially among young people.
One of the guest speakers mentioned more openness, which would be good. However, of course, you also have certain people who shouldn't know the details of what NATO does because that could be dangerous. I also think globalization is playing a big part in the future. Everything's becoming more international, and NATO already is international, so it could definitely play to that strength and use it. And it was also mentioned that there are 40 or 50 partners around the globe, so pretty much around the globe. So that's also very good for them. And I think NATO has a lot of potential, but they need to get more out there as well.
The third major thing is partnerships. You know, it was amazing to me when I came back at this level to NATO to learn that there are many, that NATO's reach, NATO's influence is well beyond the 28 allies. I had missed this. I guess that's behind in my reading, as my wife says. or something. But in fact, there are 40 nations today with which NATO has operational partnerships. This is a pretty diverse set of 40. They range geographically from Mauritania through Japan. Okay? Some of them bring great substantial military capability to the alliance. Sweden, Finland, Australia come to mind as very militarily capable partners. Others bring political diversity. You know, NATO at 28 doesn't have an Arab state, doesn't have an East Asian state, doesn't have an African state. With our partners, we have all three. So not only do our partners bring military capability, but they bring political diversity. They enrich our political consultations, because imagine, I mean, we've got, so let's take Syria, for example. When we have consultations on Syria, we'll convene at 28, but we'll invite the Mediterranean dialogue partners, so 7 Arab states, plus or 6 plus Israel, to the table. We'll meet at 28 plus 7, and that dialogue, that consultation will be enriched because we're getting perspectives that are not resident in the alliance.
So how is NATO going to reflect in Wales on the 22 conclusions of the Council? We think it's very important to see what will be the outcome, particularly when the Council is going to talk about it again in June next year, again in Chefsache. Thank you.
What are the lessons learned from the cooperation with other institutions and actors in Afghanistan, and what are the implications for the future within NATO in terms of interoperability, command and control, etc., etc.?
For example, for NATO it's very important to try to reinvigorate the standing naval forces. Because over the last couple of years it has been difficult to generate forces for them and to keep them attractive for allies to contribute to. One of the reasons, we think, is that they do not do enough exercising with high-end capabilities. So I think we will work on that towards the summit. I think that it would not be wise for the EU to develop similar standing naval forces. I don't know where they want to go to, but that would add to the difficult choice of European allies and EU member states to what forum to commit their forces, to the standing naval forces of NATO or to a similar construction in the EU. So I think there we need to talk to each other and try to find ways of progressing without duplicating each other.
When America feels threatened, or when there's a security challenge globally, America has 2 basic challenges. It can go it alone. Now, go it alone is typically not really alone. You might grab a few others. You might have this coalition of the willing, but basically you can go it alone. That's got certain advantages, right? You only have to get it past the White House. White House has got to bring Congress along. Maybe you go to the UN, maybe you don't go to the UN, and you can act pretty quickly, okay? So it's got sort of a lower threshold of action, but it doesn't have a whole lot of political legitimacy. And as time goes on, it tends to erode rather quickly, okay? There's another option, thanks to NATO, and that is that you don't have to go it alone, Americans. Okay? You have another option in the tool bag, and that is you could go to Brussels, you can come to the North Atlantic Council, and you can make your case. And if you sell that case at 28, it's got to go to 28 to 0. So it's a very high threshold for action, because you've got, NATO only operates at consensus, right? But if you do that in America, you don't have to go alone. You've got 28 allies who together can pool capabilities, who are rehearsed, who are experienced, who are practiced, who have proven to be effective, and have greater legitimacy, greater political legitimacy than if you try to go it alone. That legitimacy pays off because it buys you staying power. And the single best example of this, I know we keep coming back to Afghanistan, but it just happens to be sort of the cause célèbre right now, is 10 years, 50 nations okay, still operating together in Afghanistan.
I would recommend to expand the agenda a little bit more than we have discussed so far, but especially because I think it's extremely important to better explain to the public why NATO is still important, and for that we need a complete picture. Well, let me conclude by saying this, and I think we have to serve.